This is August 17th, and we're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have the pleasure of speaking with William Watson and Mrs. Watson, and I'm so glad you both are here. And,
thank you.
She tells me that you were in the PT service, and we can begin there, or where you grew up, just whichever.
Well, no, I was in Purdue University before Pearl Harbor, and the Navy come to the campus, and I was a senior in electronics and electrical engineering, and the Navy came to the campus and said they wanted to get some electrical engineers lined up because they could see the war was coming. And so I had two roommates, and we're all seniors in Purdue, and we all signed up for the Navy.
And that was about
1941, October 41.
All right.
And then we're taking all these correspondence courses that the Navy gives you to know about rules and regulations and discipline and all that stuff. So we were doing all that while we're doing our studies at Purdue, and then in December 7th, when I Pearl Harbor. So
Your timing was so close.
yeah, so we really knew we were in then, and because originally we were going to go in and help with naval research on weapons and whatnot. So, but when Pearl Harbor hit, why, that changed the picture, and we ended up being rushed through our senior year at Purdue and graduated early, actually in May of '42, and sent right up to Notre Dame for a officers boot camp. We were already ensigns in the Navy, and up there you have to go through a certain amount of naval more rules and regulations and boot camp type stuff. And so after, I don't know, 6 weeks or so at Notre Dame, why, they sent us to Harvard and MIT in Boston for radar training. And so I was only a couple weeks at Harvard, and I had taken most of the same material at Purdue, so they said, you don't need to stay there, so you might as well go over to MIT. And they sent us over to MIT for a very concentrated course on radar.
Was it new? I think it was just beginning, wasn't it, radar?
Oh yeah, it was new. We didn't have any PT boats in the war theater that had radar. And if they had, well, like President Kennedy's boat wouldn't have been sunk if he'd had radar. He'd have seen the Japanese destroyer bearing down on him. But with radar, you can see all the other vessels in the immediate area. So it was very important to get radar on everything you could put it on. So PT boats, being only 80 feet long, were about the smallest boats that got any radar, but due to the type of thing they were going to be doing in the Pacific, they needed radar because we were on night patrol. Airplanes patrolled the war zone in the daytime, and PT boats did the night work. And so we needed the radar very badly. So ours was one of the first squadrons to get radar, and it was a Raytheon radar that was real new, and it was called the SO radar. Anyhow, we got our shipments, and the boats were already built when radars were being manufactured. So we went on down from Melville, Rhode Island, which is a PT training center, on down to Brooklyn Navy Yard to install radar on all of our 12 boats. And at any rate, that took several months to get all the parts and get them tested and field trials and everything. So we were down there for the spring of '43, fitting out our squadron with radar. And there were a couple other squadrons down there being fitted out also, and they had radar. So we were all set up to go to the Pacific Theater to fight the Japs as soon as we could get fitted out, which was, I believe it was June or July, wasn't it, dear?
Well, you had a commission at the New York Yacht Club. Remember, you went out to New
Well,
York?
I'm trying to remember what the date was. We went over to...
We were married in June 21st, '43, at the the little church around the corner in New York, and you were based at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And it was about that time they had the commissioning of the squadron, and then you shipped out last of August.
Anyhow, it was summertime. That's all I can remember.
43.
We left in a convoy of ships going down to the Panama Canal Zone, and our PT boats didn't go clear over to New Guinea on their own because the engines would have been worn out before they got there. So they put them up on top of tankers, and tankers were very important during the war because they needed the fuel for aircraft. So we went to the Panama Canal with a convoy, I don't know, 6 or 7 tankers. And I remember when we got down around Cuba, one of the tankers started having some kind of trouble, and we just kept right on going for Panama because you didn't dare stop because the place was lousy with German submarines.
I
And
didn't know you got down there.
we never saw that tanker again. But anyhow, we went on down to Aruba and then on over Aruba to get filled up with 100 octane gasoline. PTs took 100 octane, and all the aircraft took 100 octane. And then we went on over to the Panama Canal, which isn't too far from Aruba. And but they had to take us off of there are 4 PTs on each tanker, and so they had to take us off of the tankers and put us down into the canal zone to go through the canal. I never did understand why, other than the ship we were going across the Pacific on was a different ship. So they got over on the other side of the canal, and we trained over there with the fleet for about a month in the area around the Panama Canal, and then we were put back on top of another tanker, a different one, which was newer and nicer, and sent over to Australia. And so we're all alone then. We didn't have any escort, and they were loaded with 100 octane gasoline, a new tanker, and us 4 PT boats in cradles up on top of the tanker. And we swung way south, kind of, you go out a ways and you see the Galapagos Islands, and you swing south, and we hit the equator, and we all were initiated into the initiation for crossing the equator. And
King Neptune.
yeah, anyhow, it was quite exciting. Anyway, in the initiation process, the doctor of our squadron was hurt. He fell off of the gangway in the initiation. He was kind of scared of getting hurt. Anyhow, so he ends up getting hurt, and we had to go into the Galapagos Islands and to a naval hospital and drop him off because he thought he had back injuries. But anyhow, then we continued from Galapagos Islands on across the Pacific by ourselves all along to heading for Brisbane, Australia. Anyhow, excuse me, I better get a drink.
Sure.
My mouth's drying up.
I think Brisbane's on either the west or the north side.
It's on the west coast,
Yes.
about halfway down. And it was a small town then. We pulled into, we stopped at a couple islands. And,
Brisbane's on the East Coast, isn't it?
oh, I'm sorry. You're right. East Coast.
Yeah,
You're
okay,
right.
all right.
First on the west coast.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Brisbane's on the east coast, and we stayed in Brisbane long enough to unload the supplies from we were taking with us into the war zone, and to get the PT boats all back off the tankers and into the water and all that stuff. So the PT boats then left Brisbane, Australia for New Guinea. Now the war at this time was just getting real hot up around New Guinea. I get my keeping directions straight. The eastern end of New Guinea, there's a nice big bay called Milne Bay, and the boats were in there for a temporary PT base where they could get supplies and learn something about what they're going to be doing. So we got all the 12 PT boats and all of our supplies up to New Guinea. And the war was in the eastern end of New Guinea at that time. And the Japs had tried to capture all of New Guinea, but it's quite a job to capture New Guinea. It's pretty
Wow,
jumbly.
isn't it?
Yeah. Some of the natives are even cannibals. Anyhow,
They were at that time,
Yeah.
back then.
we stayed there in Milne Bay for a couple weeks and then went on up to the first base, which was where the Japs had been pushed back to. I don't know, it's a few hundred miles from the eastern tip. But anyhow, the Army was fighting the Japs, and we established a base, and I forgot the name of it now, but it was a small base, and our squadron was the only one using it. And from there we could patrol what was the northern coast of New Guinea for Japanese troop movements. And we did our work at night, and the planes worked in the daytime. So every night we had to have 4 boats ready for patrol, and that's where the radar was real important, to spot the Japanese barge traffic up and down the coast of New Guinea, and to sink barges as best we could.
Was there a lot of the Japanese barge traffic?
Oh yeah, they didn't have any big ships moving their supplies up and down the coast. They were retreating, really. And they used barges because of the reef. The northern coast of New Guinea has a lot of reefs, and you can't get a big ship into most places. So they had quite a few barges, and they were motorized barges. They had power. And they kept moving their men and supplies back to the west as they were retreating from the American Army. So anyhow, we kept our night patrols going, and 4 boats every night, and all patrol, and keeping all that equipment warning was my main job, because you don't want a boat going out on patrol if the radios don't work. Besides radar, we had all these VHF and other radios, and flux gate compasses, and all the paraphernalia that goes with trying to navigate. So we had to keep 4 boats ready every night to go, and that was I had a little crew of about 4 guys, and we had to keep every boat come back. Usually it'd be something wrong, and bullet hole in an antenna or something. So we tried to keep up with all the demand of the patrols. So that went on for I don't know, almost a year, pushing these Japs back from one end of New Guinea to the other. And we literally did. We stayed on that job, and the Japs kept retreating. And the further up or toward the west, on the north coast of New Guinea, we found that the Jap resistance was less, because they were running out of supplies. And some of their supplies had to come in by Jap submarines, because they couldn't get any ships in. But up at the other end of New Guinea, near Landia and places, they did get ship traffic or get supplies. But a lot of the Jap resistance, the Japs were really suffering from malnutrition and malaria and whatnot. So, but we kept after them and kept sinking barges and made their life more miserable. And so, at any rate, that went on until we got to the very western tip of New Guinea. And New Guinea, it looks like an old dead turkey. It's a funny shaped island, but it's kind of east and west stretched out. Anyhow, we got up to finally the western end of New Guinea, and by that time the war was advancing on up to the Philippines. So General MacArthur was our commander-in-chief, because MacArthur was in charge of all the military forces, Army, Navy, and Marines, west of a certain line in the Pacific, which was just to the east of the edge of New Guinea. So basically all of New Guinea and the Philippines were basically under General Douglas MacArthur. And of course MacArthur liked PTs, because it was a PT boat under Buckley that brought him out of the Philippines, he and his wife and child, to rescue him really from Manila when the Japs moved in there in '41. So he always had a good spot for us, and we then started fitting out for the invasion of the Philippine Islands, and this went on for several weeks, and then we proceeded from the, I forgot the name of the island now.
Mindanao?
No. Well, anyhow, island where we were all based, this little strip of sand, and it was amazing because you could walk across it in about 5 minutes, and you could walk the length of it in an hour, but that was big enough for a base. And so we had, by that time we had quite a few squadrons of PT boats at Windy, that's the name, Windy Island. And they were all being prepared to go into the Philippines, into Leyte Gulf. And so the Battle of Leyte Gulf was the next big operation for us.
I've seen that word Leyte, L-E-Y-T-E.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and it was, we had quite a few naval ships and everything involved in it, and PT boats did their part to throw some torpedoes at Jap ships. And the big problem when we got up to the Philippines was the kamikaze airplanes from Japan. These were dedicated young people that were going to give up their life and dive their airplane right into anything that floated, any American ship or any Allied vessel they could sink. Well, it was really a suicide thing. They had no way of getting back home again. They had to end up striking something.
Yeah,
So
they'd run out of gas.
yeah, and they didn't even have any landing gear. As I remember, there
I
was
had
something.
heard they didn't have parachutes.
Yeah, oh yeah, they were literally
Yeah,
chained to the
lightweight.
airplane.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we got up to the Philippines, and then the war took on a much more severe turn because at that point they were even diving on PT boats. They were so desperate for something to sink. I mean, they wasn't that many big Navy ships around. They stayed out to sea further, and they'd come up into the Philippines looking for somewhere to crash into, and so they would go for the PT boats or anything they could.
They had some close calls too.
Yeah, and one day 3 different kamikazes attacked us, and I was on one of our tenders when one of them came, and it was scary. He was almost hit us, but the gunners had scared him enough or something. He deflected and he knocked the antenna off the ship. He went right over us and knocked the antenna off, but didn't detonate. And it detonated in the water right alongside the ship, threw water all over us. But anyhow, it didn't really sink the ship or anything. And then after that, I was back on the shore where we were setting up a repair depot for radar, and we had inherited a barge with pretty good maintenance facilities on it to do our repair work, and I could see that they were going to be trying to sink the barge next, even though it was tied up right at the dock. So anyhow, we got back over there, and another kamikaze came, and he missed the barge, and I remember ducking behind the coconut tree because when you see them coming at you, you have no idea where they're going to hit. and then another one of our tenders, the Orestes, I stayed on it for a while. It was a little more comfortable than the original boat because these tenders were kind of desperate. Were hard for the Navy to get anything that they could set up for a tender or command ship. So the first one we were on was called the Hilo, and it was a converted yacht from the guy that owned the Morton Salt Company. He had donated his yacht to the Navy, and they converted it best they could into a tender and a command ship for the first PT squadrons out there. So anyhow, that was a wooden vessel, and he didn't feel very safe on it. So I went over in the Orestes and stayed on it for a while, and then one day I was over on the land, and it went out, well, it was taking off from Mindanao, which was a next move, and I wasn't going to go with it. So anyhow, it was, kamikazes hit it, and my roommate was killed, and it didn't sink, but it burned out the whole ship, and it was a mess, so they had to end up towing it back to Pearl Harbor. But anyhow, the war was pretty rough when we were at that point. I didn't go from New Guinea up to the Philippines on one of the PT boats because our skipper, Commander Davis, he wanted me to stay back with him and we'd get all the supplies and everything together and get them on a supply ship, which we did. But he and I then flew up to the Philippines on a PBY. And PBY is a very slow airplane. It's an airplane that lands on the water, and it's a real, you feel like you're going about 90 miles an hour, and these other airplanes are zooming all around you. But yeah, we got up into the southern southern Philippine Islands, and the Jap Zero saw us, and we were considered pretty much a dead duck. We didn't even have a machine gun, but so fortunately there was a real big bank of clouds real near us, and the pilot flipped the airplane over into this cloud bank, real heavy clouds, and the Zero then couldn't find us. So we stayed circling around the cloud bank for an hour or so until we figured he was gone, which he had. And so we flew on up to Lady Gulf and landed up there and joined our squadron. But it was pretty exciting, and then at that point I'd been promoted to the RMO for the whole task group, and the RMO, I was a full lieutenant by then. Now RMO was the radio materiel officer, who was responsible for all the communications and the equipment.
You had a lot to take care of.
Yeah, I was just a kid out of college, and anyhow, I stayed with that job for several months, and I got orders. I've been over there over 2 years, so I've got my opportunity to go back to the States. And since we just got married before I left, why, it was really something to look forward to. So I left the PTs in Lady Gulf and got on an old troop ship, which was an awful old thing, and went back to Pearl Harbor. But the old troop ship was so old that when they got back to Pearl Harbor, they decommissioned it from the Navy and gave it, or sold it to the Brazilian Navy. And they didn't have it but a few months before the boilers broke and blew up. So the old troop ship sank, but it had made its job. And
You were not on it.
no, it wasn't even in the Navy anymore then. It was gone. So we were from Pearl Harbor back to San Francisco and going home. I was on the Matson line, one of their passengers liners. I forgot the name, Matsonia. Anyhow, I got a ride back to San Francisco on that, and that had an awful lot of casualties from the heavy fighting in Iwo Jima.
Oh, man.
And these boys were all shot up, and we were in some heavy seas, and the old Matson, you know, it was a nice big cruise ship. It rolled around pretty heavy, and these poor guys were so injured and shot up that they had to put them in hammocks.
You probably seasick.
And so that as the ship rolled, they could swing with the hammock,
Dear. Yeah.
and you could hear them moaning and hurting.
Yeah.
And it was quite an experience. But now we got back to San Francisco, and went on. I was back in the PTs for a short time to help develop some. We had 40mm guns on the stern of the PTs, and they wanted to make them automatic so that they would track radar targets kind of automatically for azimuth and elevation. And was in that only a few weeks, so we were sent up to Annapolis for postgraduate school in Annapolis, where they were getting us ready for more advanced weapons. And so anyhow, that was where I was at Annapolis for a year, and you really had a great time. I mean, it was a rough school. It was hard to go back to training, college training, after you'd been away for 3 or 4 years, and there was I don't know, there was about 50 of us in the class, and it was a very interesting bunch, because some of them had come from submarines and some from battleships, and 2 of us were from PT boats, and it was a real cross-section of the Navy. Oh, quite a few flyers, aircraft carrier people.
I expect the variety of experience was an
Oh,
asset, wasn't it?
Very interesting.
Oh, it was,
Yeah, real interesting guys, and I really enjoyed all my friends we made up there. In fact, a few of them are still around, and they're scattered all over.
I was thinking it was almost 2 years you were in the action in the South Pacific. Is that about
Yeah, it
right?
wasn't quite 2 years in action because we spent time, getting off tankers and getting supplies and getting up to New Guinea, and so it really in combat was probably no more than 14, 15 months, but we were bombed every night and all that kind of stuff. The Japs, even though they were retreating, they'd send some of the military, some of their aircraft over us, because they knew where we were, and drop a few bombs every night, enough to keep you awake, and so we had a foxhole right outside our tent and all that kind of thing. And living in New Guinea is not the easiest place in the world to live because the mosquitoes are one of the big problems, and they give you malaria. And so we were having to wear shirts with long sleeves, and it's hot over there too. You wear your shirt with long sleeve and long pants, and keep her all covered up because of the mosquito threat. And we had to take Ataburn, which was a pill that turned you yellow after a while, so you didn't look too
oh,
healthy.
was he yellow when he got back to San
It was
Francisco?
kind of like a yellow dye, but
Does it work?
yeah, it worked. I didn't get malaria, which I was always so grateful for. And
I think you might want to mention when you are RMO that you're still in contact with Trig and O and
Oh,
the
yeah.
stories these guys tell about
Right.
trying to get equipment together to repair
Yes.
the radar, and how they trade off from one squadron to another. That was
these pictures aren't too good, but
Well, let me
Th-
look.
this
I
is
can-
a- this is a picture here of Trigg and Wallace and Bob Owen and myself. We stayed together all during all the Philippines and the New Guinea experience. And we still get together, except Wallace is gone now. He died.
and I get email every other day from the other two. Some
The other
stories.
two and I, we get together, try to get together once a year.
Yeah.
And
Do you get together in Atlanta? Do you have a meeting place?
Well, they
no.
picked them once.
Oh, they have conventions for all the PT boats have out of Memphis, Tennessee, they have a headquarters, and they have a convention once a year. And I haven't been to one for several years, but I've gone to quite a few of them. But
Pittsburgh and Denver and
that was
Charlotte.
pretty well attended a few years ago, and now there's so many of them are dead that it's kind of getting hard to get a group together. So anyhow, they're still doing quite a job, and they support the museum, PT Boat Museum, which is in
Memphis.
the one up in
Fall
Massachusetts.
River, Massachusetts.
Fall River, Massachusetts. There's a Navy museum which has, I think, a battleship and a cruiser and a submarine and PT boat, 2 PT boats yet that people can go through and look at. And so that's one of the projects they try to keep alive.
Tell where we were on VE Day. We were in New York at Times Square on
Oh,
VE
yeah.
Day.
Really?
I luckily got back in time for VE Day and well, when they dropped the atom bomb too. So yeah, we were in New York, and it went crazy when the European war had folded, because that meant so many of the guys could come home. And
Then
then
VJ Day.
on VJ Day, when the Japs surrendered, that was quite a experience. We were at the Naval Academy, and I remember these cadets were so happy to know the war was over that they were throwing rolls of toilet paper out the windows of the dormitories.
They were without for a week.
You couldn't imagine with all the Navy
They
discipline.
just celebrated.
But they
And
just
then
let
they rang.
them have a good time.
They rang the bell that from the Spanish-American War, and it hadn't been rung, I guess, since the end of that. And it's at the Naval Academy on the ground, and boy, they just kept that going.
Did that
I
bill
always
survive?
liked that.
Yeah.
And when I was RMO in the Philippines in Lady Gulf, we were getting ready for the invasion of Japan, and anyhow I had to go to a lot of meetings, and most of the meetings were on another island, And I remember on a ride on one of the PTs took me over to Tacloban, which is a big city around there, which wasn't any city. I mean, at that time it was a few blocks long and the streets were all mud and everything, but General MacArthur had set up his headquarters in the old governor's house, and so it was about the only decent house in town. It was a pretty nice home. And so I was told to go over and meet with some Air Force people to be sure we had the frequencies of the radios and between the airplanes and the PTs so they could talk to each other. So anyhow, when I went to get off the PT boat onto the dock, and there's terrific tides there, and the dock was 6 feet or so above the deck of the boat. I had to stretch pretty far to get even on the first rung of the ladder, and the whole...
Go ahead, it turned over. There we go.
And trying to get off the PT and up on the dock so I could get to the meeting, my pants ripped out, the back of my pants.
You did have another pair.
Not with me. Anyhow, you have to realize that our laundry was done in a very crude way down in New Guinea. We'd tie a rope on the legs of our pants and shirts and things and put them out in the surf so the waves come in, would churn your clothes around, and it was really a saltwater wash machine with sand.
Bleach them
Yeah, and you try if you're lucky to find a little fresh water to rinse them out.
and get them back.
Yeah, and so my pants had gone through that for a year or more, and anyhow the threads weren't as good as thread today. They weren't getting rotten, so there was with the back of my pants all ripped open, and I had my jacket on because I was going to this meeting with a bunch of colonels and stuff from the Air Force. But anyhow, I had my jacket on so I could disguise them pretty well. And I asked one of the patrol guys on the beach where the big meeting was for that day, and he said, "Oh, it's in that big house right up there," and that happened to be where General MacArthur's was with his staff, there's other people. Anyhow, so here I am going up to this house where General MacArthur was, and he was having a big meeting, so the guy had told me right to go up there. It was a big meeting, but that wasn't the meeting I was supposed to go to. I was supposed to go to one where there was Air Force captains and majors, but not generals. Anyhow, I got up there, and in one of the big rooms in this house, they'd set up this big dinner because General MacArthur was evidently having his big meeting about the invasion of Japan and also going up into Manila in the Philippines. But anyhow, I stepped into this meeting room, and all these generals from MacArthur at the head table and everything were all sitting there eating their dinners. But anyhow, I had just walked in. I realized I was in the wrong meeting. So anyhow, I saluted real quick and backed out. Backed out, mind you. I didn't dare turn around.
Oh dear.
And I got out of that one. But I had to go to a meeting in much lower down, more working people. Anyhow, that was the kind of thing, though, that happens to you when you're over there for a very
You
long
mean the
period.
unexpected?
Yeah. Well, you're always getting something different. The elements, you have the rainy season, you have the dry season, and things that you aren't really used to coming from the States. And so it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, we didn't get to which was your home state before you
Oh,
left.
Indiana. I was raised in Indiana, went to Purdue, and anyhow.
Was there anything or everything in your growing up experience that sort of prepared you for?
Oh yes, I think the Boy Scouts are a wonderful group because I was in the Boy Scouts for a number of years, and I think Scout training was so valuable because when you're tossed into a environment like we had in New Guinea, where you're living in a tent and you're sleeping, you have a canvas bunk with a little air mattress or something. Anyhow, but you have to have a mosquito net all around it, and you have to get used to a lot of inconveniences, and Boy Scout training is very valuable, and just all kind of things you learn from as a kid.
Mention about the trailer you built.
Oh,
You build a trailer?
Well, that was before when I was passing newspapers. I passed newspapers for 5 years because my folks didn't have any money to send me to college, so I decided I wanted to go to college and be an electrical engineer. Decided that way back early.
How did you come to decide electrical engineering? It's
That's
such a
funny.
specialty.
There was a radio factory 3 blocks from my home, and they used to throw the trash, it wasn't trash, it was just parts that didn't work in the manufacture of radios. Everything with vacuum tubes back in those days, out to the outside. And as a kid, I'd go down there with some other kids, and we'd pick up these little pieces of radios until eventually we could get enough pieces and make our own radio. But so as I grew up from probably the 7th grade on, I was collecting these parts for radios and just got intrigued with electricity and electrical engineering.
And he still is.
I still
That's
have
why we're having trouble getting rid of
still have a house full of stuff yet that I need to get rid of. But anyhow,
You
that's
got music out of those radio pieces.
I had the biggest amplifier at that time of anybody around because this company, I forgot the name of it now, Capart was part of it. Anyhow, Farnsworth Capart. They built some of the radio equipment which was really powerful. In fact, one of their orders was for the people in Arabia. They wanted a big hi-fi system, and so anyhow, we got parts for really powerful amplifiers, and then they got me a turntable. So we kept pretty much up on music and the gang of young people I ran around with, and Everett was one of them. Anyhow, we would get the latest record as soon as we could afford it, and have that in this big amplifier and have a dance at one of the kids' house, which
Sounds like fun to me.
Yeah.
Tell him about building the trailer.
well, anyhow, I wanted to go to Purdue, and
Passing papers money.
Yeah.
I didn't have a place to live, and I knew that the biggest expense, see, at that time you could go to Purdue for nothing.
Really?
You had to pay a few fees, maybe $100 or so for fees to go to the athletic events, which were necessary, and fueling your books and registration. But if you had $100, you could go to college.
Wonderful.
And so I knew that wasn't going to be a problem because I'd passed papers for 5 years and I had saved my money and I had $500 in the bank. And so
Guy's
I-
picture in the paper? Or
well, I decided where are you going to live. So another boy I knew had been over there for a couple of years at Purdue. He was an ag student, and he had gotten a trailer and lived in this house trailer, and gotten a farmer let him to hook up electricity to the barn and so forth. So he told me what he did. So I just said, well, that's my answer. I'm going to make me a trailer, and I'll live in. Oh yeah, I live in a trailer, and get a bicycle, and I could bicycle into classes every day. So I was all set. I had the bicycle from the newspaper route, and I got a neighbor of mine. He was a very good cabinet maker, and he'd helped me a lot on what to do. So I built this 16-foot trailer out of best materials I could afford at the time, and got I-beams and stuff for the frame, and old axle from the automobile for the wheels, and got this thing together, and spent the whole summer before entering Purdue building this trailer. And I had a coal stove in it, and a little hot plate, and so.
I'm impressed that you did the thinking ahead at such a young age.
Well,
Oh, he made the newspapers that
Oh,
he'd been
really?
passing all these years. And
Yeah.
they
You got in that
pictures
same
and
paper?
yeah, the Marion Chronicle made me a big
Yes.
front page picture of I was standing in front of my trailer and getting ready to go to Purdue.
What fun.
Well, it inspired a lot of young people to do
Plan.
plan and to go to college, because it wasn't impossible if you wanted to bad enough. Although
This was in 1938.
All right.
the Depression was still
Yeah,
with us.
business wasn't that great.
Oh, it was terrible. So I made 5 cents a week off each customer on my paper out. And with 100 customers, I got roughly $5 a week I could put in my savings account. But the trailer set me back a little bit, so I spent a couple $100 getting the trailer built.
I would not call that extravagant.
But anyhow, the trailer got finished, and right at the last minute, I guess it got so much publicity that, and my aunt was at West Lafayette, and she had heard about my determination, so she convinced a person she knew, Dr. Crockett, that a pretty nice big house there in West Lafayette, where Purdue is, that they needed a yard man, or they needed somebody to help around there and keep the cars washed and everything. So she said, why don't you come over here and talk to Dr. Crockett? And well, first we went to see the dean of Purdue University, and I told the dean about my trailer, and I was all set to tow it over there. And the dean didn't like the idea at all.
He didn't.
Well,
What did he say?
well, it's too much like junk housing, and
Well, the years before there had been some.
But he was, you know, he realized that some of these farm boys had done that. There were a few trailers around. But it would be pretty tough because they have a lot of rain up there in West Lafayette, and they have a lot of, the winters are terrible. A lot of slush and snow in the winter, and transportation. If you're living on some guy's farm, you know, a couple of miles from the campus, well, you're going to have to ride that bicycle in some pretty bad weather. So he didn't think too much of that idea, but had the trailer already built. But Dr. Crockett decided that I could live in his basement and be his houseboy. And so I did that, and I never took the trailer to Purdue, but this is much better because my room was right next to the furnace, and it was nice and warm. I could walk instead of a bicycle.
Oh, yeah.
I was only about 4 or 5 blocks from the first buildings on the campus.
I bet you didn't even have time to get homesick, did you?
No.
But they really took advantage of him, you know,
Well,
money-wise and everything. It was a good setup, but.
I didn't get any wages, but I had a place to sleep and a desk and electricity, and it was much better living than I had in the trailer. But
Do you have brothers and sisters at
I
home?
had a sister, Jean, who's dead now, but yeah, she wanted to go to college too, but unfortunately, she didn't get a chance.
In those years, because I graduated in 40 from high school, he graduated in 38, and if your family didn't have all that much money, there was only so much money, and it would go to the son in the family to get an education instead of the
You gotta have a breadwinner.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And but I do have, you know, some of my friends did go to college, but not a lot.
Well,
And it was especially true 2 years before in '38, because that was the end of the Depression.
Yeah, when I was growing up, the girls were going to get married, or to use the phrase I heard more than once, just going to get
Just
married.
yeah.
well, a girl
That's the way
could,
it was.
That's right.
get married, or she could be a school teacher, or she could be a nurse.
Mhm.
And that seemed like to me about it, or be a house, you know, maid or something, cook. So they really didn't have many opportunities. So I felt for the girls; it was tough for them. Girls today, it's a different world out there. They
Yeah,
get
there's
right
more
in
doors
business.
open.
Yeah.
But in his senior year at Purdue, he did go room with the 2 old grade school and high school friends who they all joined the Navy together.
Really?
And then he spoke about them to begin with, the 2 guys. But when he went to Panama, was when you saw Bob.
Yeah.
And in the winter you saw, in Boston, you saw Gene quite a bit.
Yeah, Bob Bond and Gene Williams were my 2 roommates my senior year because I decided 3 years of being a houseboy, I needed a little bit of camaraderie and living with other students. So they lived in a rooming house real close to the campus, practically across the street, And they said, well, we can have 3 in our bedroom, or in our room, we can, landlady lets 3 of us. So I moved in with them, and we were all seniors, and all had grown up together, and very close friends. So, yeah, we all, well, the war was getting hot over in Europe, and we knew that the war would eventually get us involved. So we all decided we would go for this Navy recruiting officer spiel about he wanted engineers for research. So we thought, well, that's a sure job, and this keep us from going in the Army, so this sounded like a good deal. So all 3 of us the same day went over to the recruiting place, and
Didn't the research sort of appeal to you?
oh yeah, it was. Well, see, you got to remember that at that time the draft board was really drafting people real close to you, and so you had to make some decisions. And
Really?
going in the Navy, and you're going to get a commission, so you'd be an officer, and you get a little more money than be a GI. But so we all joined the same day, and I remember my eyes had deteriorated a little bit studying so much that I couldn't read the eye chart too well. So somebody told me, and I had gone to an eye doctor a couple days before the exam, and gotten me some glasses. So I knew I could read all the eye charts, but just nearsightedness.
Mm.
And so when I'm standing in this long line of guys, because quite a few guys had decided to join the same day. There's been 100 of us. Anyhow, I'm in this long line of guys reading off the chart, and the guy next to me said, "Get those glasses off. They see glasses. They won't take it up." At that time they were so strict yet on their rules that they didn't want any officers with glasses. Well, for a pilot or something, you can see why. I mean, but for guys going to do research, that didn't seem like a problem. But anyhow, he said, "You have to get those glasses. I'll try to read that chart out." So they were running them through so fast. The guys ahead of me were reading AFGP, so reading the chart, and I just memorized what they read. So when the guy said read the chart, I just said what the guy ahead of me had read. So I passed. So anyhow, I kept the glasses in my pocket. But they were so desperate to get recruits in engineering especially, because the Army and Navy and all the services knew they're going to have some technical people. The war already had started to change in communications, and radar was already known enough. So it was quite interesting.
Actually, you were in a lot of critical times, and you had a lot of critical turning points.
Oh yeah,
Both.
yeah. When you're raised during the Great Depression, you really appreciate every little nickel and dime you can make, and goodness, I'm still a pinch penny, because you never get over the fact that
I like the word frugal.
yeah,
That's right.
frugal is probably a little nicer, but it's true. And you see a lot of professional people like the medical doctors that are that way, and you realize that they have an awful long time of trying to get through school and with very little money, and they never seem to forget that. And I'm scared to death that this country is going to be back in another depression one of these years, and I hope young people are able to cope with it. But it makes for real good citizens.
Yes.
People that appreciate what they have here. When you go overseas, you realize how lucky we are here. We have facilities and opportunities and things that those people there never get a chance at, unless they got money and they're in a different class. So I'm
We
very
didn't start
grateful.
off being a throwaway society, did
Oh
we?
goodness, no, we repaired everything. When you cut grass to make a few more pennies, the lawnmowers were all push lawnmowers. They didn't have motors on them. You had to cut the grass, you had to make the wheels turn, and that turned over the grass cutting blades, and so it was hard
I've
work.
seen some of those lawnmowers going very rapidly.
Yeah, manual labor was tough.
Well, we're about to wind up. What would you say not a most memorable experience, but did the war experiences impress your viewpoint other than what you already had about life plans in general?
What do you mean about standards of living or what? Well, I never believed in war to start with, and I wasn't gung-ho on shooting anybody. But I had seen enough guys coming back all injured and everything, and I was beginning to realize over New Guinea and the Philippines that this is a very serious thing. And how do you once get, somebody starts the world on one of these big things going,
How do you get
how
it
do you
done?
ever get it done and get out of there? And so when Truman decided we'd use the atom bomb, I couldn't, I thought that was probably the best solution, because we were going to have to go into Japan, and it would have been a very difficult, been a lot of boys killed. A lot of Japanese people killed, a lot more than were killed by the atom bomb. But they were that kind of people. And you had to respect them for that, but at the same time you realize you're trapped in this thing, and you got to see it through to the end.
I think the description down when you just enter about the impact that Pearl Harbor had, how it changed our, we all remember
Yes.
that announcement.
I remember
And,
exactly where I was. I
Oh,
was
yeah.
Right, and you were a young girl.
Yeah.
But how it changed all your thinking and everything about everything. It was like all the problems of the Depression years were just out of it. and also, at the end, I think it says down there, when it was over, all you wanted to do was to
Go home.
settle down, go home, get married if you weren't, have a family, build a house. We built a house, and he did most of the work himself.
Yeah.
You just want to get going with life like you thought it should be.
Yeah, because when when I came back, right before I went into the Navy, I had gotten a job with AT&T as an engineer, and they hired several guys they knew were going right in the service, but they wanted certain people, and they were very choosy, and so I worked for them for 2 weeks before I had to go on active duty, and they said, if you can get 2 weeks in, we'll keep you on as a regular employee, and when you come back, we'll bridge your service, which was a great deal. And so when I came home, I had a job. In fact, I had about 3 jobs, but
How do you have 3?
well, I worked for a radio factory, and I had done a pretty good job evidently there, because they wanted me to come back, and I worked for them for a few more months. But at any rate, I decided the AT&T job looked like it had the most potential, because they were putting in television networks all across the country, and a lot of radio relay equipment and equipment that I was used to. I mean, it was kind of my work. I've been trained in MIT and the Navy to do these kind of things. So at any rate, started out with AT&T, and they have a training program that they put you out of the line gang for a while and this and that, so they want you to start from the bottom up. And so it was a good experience. And anyhow, I got moved to Cleveland. I was started out in Annapolis, Indiana, and got moved to Cleveland, Ohio. We got up there, and housing was still very tough. After the war, excuse me. Housing in this country was, it was very difficult, and they just didn't have enough houses for any GI who was going to get married and raise a family. So I found a road just south of Cleveland that, Broadview Heights, that allowed people to come in there and build their own house without harassing them too much with zoning problems. And so I bought a lot on the street where about everybody was an ex-serviceman. And I did what I could to contract things like digging a hole for the basement and all that, but we built our first house.
Really?
Because, like building a trailer was small stuff compared to building a house. So every weekend and my vacation time I could get from AT&T in the summer, I was working on the house. And,
We moved in without even a bathroom wall,
yeah.
but that was one of the first things we.
See, and they let you do that in this area because it was out of the influence of the Cleveland market enough that it was basically a working man's community. And a great bunch of old GI people, or ex-service people, and so we had a good time. We'd help each other. Help each other and all that. So we started the house and got it completed enough. Got a roof over it, got a furnace in the basement, and got the basement and that one, and windows and doors and everything in. So by fall, the guy that owned the house we were renting, he wanted his house back for his own son. So we had that time 2 kids, and then Marie was pregnant, so another was due in another month. So we had a house with a door and windows and electricity and everything, but we didn't have all the walls in. It was a kind of construction so that the roof was supported with just one bearing wall down the middle. But anyhow, the bathroom didn't have any walls, but we put curtains up around them. We had the plumbing in. But they let us live in this house.
And once you moved in, you got more done fast,
Oh,
because you were
yeah.
there, you
You
didn't
didn't
have to go
spend more
back.
time.
Right there.
Yeah.
So,
Gee, I think that was neat to get a
Oh,
house
yeah.
built.
even
Well,
put up my own chimney.
You
It's a
kept,
nice
you kept
area.
at it till it got finished, didn't you?
Yeah, it took 5 years.
And then you got transferred to New York.
Before I got it quite finished, I got transferred, and I remember my boss and everybody saying, "Bill, is the house finished yet? House finished yet?" And I said, no, I didn't want to move to New York.
Parentheses, as soon as you get finished,
Yeah.
we're moving you.
We're going to sell that house and move you to New York.
That is wow.
Well, finally, they said, "You're blocking the ladder. You got to move to New York." So anyhow, because the ladder was, where you get these little promotions and you move up in the company. But
Would you say a sense of humor helps?
oh yeah. But I had wonderful bosses. I mean, the people I worked for at AT&T were just jewels. I mean, companies that were so choosy about people that they took in.
It
It
makes
was
so much difference.
a great experience, and AT&T was like a big family back in those days. That was still right after the war. They had a lot of construction going on. They were putting in coaxial cables and putting in radio relay systems, and they needed us real bad. But they needed us out in the field and needed us in New York, and some people had to go out all over the West putting up radio relay towers. So it was a lot of traveling. It was hard to raise a family, but
We have 3 children.
yeah, well, after I got the house started, we already had Greg, which is our little guy, and anyhow, we had some tough times.
We
Cause
lost Greg, he fell down the basement steps
Oh,
of this
that's
house we
right.
built. And the neighborhood, I can't tell you how they took us to heart, but
yes.
we got on to, lived in New Jersey, because I didn't want to go back to New York, because we were married in New York and it was exciting. He was a Navy officer and we got him all these great places, to move 2 kids back to New York, Well, we got a place in New Jersey and we're still friends. In fact, I called one family last night, good friends back there, and that was good with the growing up years with the boys.
Mm.
And then,
yeah, they were at the age where they're in the Boy Scouts, and I see commuting from out on the edge of civilization in New Jersey into New York City every day took an hour and a half. I first had a mile to go to get to the railroad station, and then I had to ride the train for a half hour, and then I had to get off the train, get on a ferry boat, ride across the Hudson River on a ferry boat, and then walk about another half mile or more to the office, which was downtown
That
Lower
takes
Manhattan.
stamina, doesn't it?
Well, it can be kind of rough in the winter too when it's pouring down rain. Excuse me. But anyhow, we did that for 6 years,
Really.
but I didn't build that house. It was already built, but it didn't have a yard. It needed a lot. Excuse me. Anyhow, that's part of the growing up. And young people today, I don't know how they're coping. I don't know how they can pay the rent.
Oh, the costs are different, aren't they?
Oh, the apartments are so expensive, and they they can't begin to think of getting a house. We had saved a few $1,000s, but gosh,
Well,
today you gotta have hundreds of thousands of dollars to start thinking about building your own house.
yes.
So it's a different world out there, and it worries me.
Well, I guess every generation's it's been a different world, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It really has, because our oldest boy, and the two boys are older than their sister, who's 50, and the boys are, 58, 57. That's a different generation. They can understand what we went through, doing without, or saving everything. They regret that now because our house is full. But the grandkids, their kids, seem to have no concept of, it's a throwaway world, we'll use this and
That's the way it looks.
toss it
That's
out.
true.
And so we're really concerned. They had easier times getting through college, but the times have changed, and-
Yeah.
But all the grandkids are doing well. We still have just one in college.
I see my nieces and nephews, and they all stay working and are busy,
Yeah.
and they fit in their world.
Yeah, it's
I have
different.
no idea. I wouldn't know how to do it.
Oh, I
Yeah.
wouldn't either. And somebody made the comment the other day that they're only comfortable with their generation, and I think that's so true. I feel really comfortable with our friends at church and wherever. But when the younger crowd starts talking, well, they have different problems than we had. They don't understand that.
You know, I was wanting to ask also. You didn't sit in the chair waiting out the war. You stayed
No,
busy.
I went back to college. Well, no, I worked in the school superintendent's office for a year, and then I went back to college, and then he came home. So I didn't
Stopped the
finish.
college. Started raising kids.
But it wasn't easy, and all the guys are out, and I've been throwing away all these things, and I had cards from like 2 or 3 different guys that were classmates, and one was in the Army, one was in the Air Force, and how they all had the same feelings. They just wanted to get this war over,
Mm.
Was that?
Yeah, that was a tape recorder.
Oh,
but
good.
we
I need to go back.
filled it up.
Did we shut the camera off?
Well, if only I knew.